10 days in power, and Donald Trump has managed to rally millions against him. But how many are actually, perhaps secretly or openly, thrilled that he's delivering on his campaign promises? When the new U.S. president slapped a sudden travel ban on citizens from 7 Muslim-majority nations, it triggered confusion, injunctions, and protests at major airports, to which his press secretary replied, "Why the hysteria? He's only doing what he said he'd do. And besides, it's temporary." But we'll see if it really is temporary and why, in the land of religious freedom, most Republican lawmakers are staying fairly quiet on the matter. How many Americans are willing to follow Trump in the singling out of, say, Muslims, in this case, or Mexicans? How far will Trump really go? Should Britain, for instance, cancel its state visit invitation? Is the president of the European Council right to equate the United States as a potential threat on par with Russia, China, and radical Islam? And as Trump rallies the pro-EU forces against him on this continent, will his words and deeds ultimately win or lose votes for people like the far-right leader Marine Le Pen come the French presidential elections in May? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at a divided America. With us, he's the director of the Political Forum, Jean-Pierre La Rochelle. Nice to see you again. Nice to see you. Michael Kirtley, founder of the Bridge to Hope campaign. More on that later. Thank you. We're also joined by attorney Joe Smallhoover.
Good.
And from Los Angeles, Sarah El-Yafi, political commentator. An outsider's eye in America, since you're Lebanese and Canadian. Thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Donald Trump is certainly a magnet. The growing polarization of U.S. politics really going into overdrive since Inauguration Day, faster and faster since that weekend travel ban. Solange Mougin has more.
Cheered like rock stars after these lawyers from the American Civil Liberties Union won their first legal battle against Donald Trump's immigration ban. They were greeted like heroes. Since the ban went into effect Friday, over 350,000 donors have given money to the ACLU. They've raised over $20 million over the weekend. That's 7 times more than their annual contributions in 2015. The Civil Liberties Union says such support is vital for the legal fights ahead.
We're gearing up for a big battle. We have no illusions that the White House won't fight it hard. And so I think it's going to be a protracted litigation battle.
The ACLU isn't the only one suing the president. The Council on American Islamic Relations has also filed.
This lawsuit, it is really the law versus Donald Trump. It is the American traditional values of openness, human dignity, and respect versus Donald Trump.
Washington State has also filed a lawsuit against the president.
In a courtroom, it is not the loudest voice that prevails. It's the Constitution. That's why we're a nation of laws.
The Washington lawsuit is being backed by the governor and by big businesses. Seattle-based Amazon, Microsoft, and Expedia have all said they're helping the lawsuit. Silicon Valley tech companies have also chimed in against the ban. But it will likely take time for the wave of lawsuits to move up through the U.S. judiciary, with chances that one or a few of the suits end up at the currently incomplete Supreme Court.
Currently incomplete, and of course we're going to know before the night is through who the Supreme Court nominee for Donald Trump is. Let me begin with you, Joe Smallhoover. San Francisco, first city to sue Donald Trump over all of this. How much of this can really play out in the courts?
Well, as you know, America is a fairly litigious society. And we often take things...
That's putting it mildly.
Putting it mildly, and as a lawyer, yeah, I can talk about that. But it's one of the venues. In fact, one of the wonders about the United States Constitution is that when the legislative branch or the executive branch stopped to function properly or overstep their bounds, the courts are there. If the courts overstep their bounds, the legislature or the executive branch is there. Our checks and balances are absolutely important and fundamental to the structure of American society. It's not the least bit surprising, therefore, that one would see litigation. What is surprising, I think, today is that there is already so much litigation 10 days into his presidency.
So much litigation 10 days into it. How have the courts, in your view, done in terms of, because the ban happened over the weekend, there were immediately protests, injunctions. How have the courts fared?
Well, right now we are in early stages. What they have done is temporary restraining orders or injunctions, which is nothing substantive. They're just stopping things for the status quo, which gives the parties the chance then to fully brief and argue the situation. So right now, the courts are doing what they should do, which is to say, all right, there's a problem. We recognize that there's a severe problem. That both sides have good arguments. Therefore, we're going to stop things, put the status quo, and come back to them in a slightly slower pace to look at them. That's normal. But again, early on in an administration, this is quite astounding.
Quite astounding. Is there a precedent for this, or a precedent for all the protests we've seen?
No, I cannot remember in my lifetime seeing anything like this, either in the courts or on the streets.
Jean-Pierre Larochelle, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it would be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next week because, as you pointed out, these stays are in place right now, but they're only temporary. And so normally they last about a week, and then we'll see if the courts are going to actually grant an injunction that lasts a bit longer, which would tend to give credence to the idea that they think that there might be some legitimate challenge to the executive order.
Now, the White House response to this has effectively been, well, what's the big deal?
Again, you talk about in a 24-hour period, 325,000 people from other countries flew in through our airports, and we're talking about 109 people from 7 countries that the Obama administration identified. And these career bureaucrats have a problem with it. I think that they should either get with the program or they can go.
Sarah El-Yafi, what's your reaction when you hear the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer?
I mean, Sean Spicer has had quite the week in terms of giving the world alternative facts, as everybody seems to like to call the word lies. I think he's just a pawn in the big game that is being played by the White House, and many people are even saying that Donald Trump is a pawn in the game of Steve Bannon. Who himself said during the summer in an interview with Vanity Fair, he said Donald Trump is just a part of a much bigger plan.
Hang on, Sarah, you really believe that the President of the United States is the pawn to his communications strategist?
I don't think Steve Bannon anticipated any of this a few months ago, but I think as soon as he got on board in the campaign, this is when the plan started. He's not the one who convinced Donald Trump to run. It's not the way it worked. Donald Trump decided to run on completely, independent motives that, surely fueled by the idea that it would be great for Donald Trump to be president and the leader of the free world. But as soon as he brought Steve Bannon on board, this is when things started to effectively take a real change. Many people credit Kellyanne Conway for the success of his campaign. It's all the mastermind is Steve Bannon. He's a Breitbart executive who couldn't dream to become a White House strategist, and he's the one who's been fueling Trump's firefight with the media. He's the one who's been discrediting and undermining all the mainstream voices that are opposed to all these anti-immigrant and anti-trade agenda. He's the one who wrote his revolutionary speech with a tight fist at the inauguration, and he's also the author of most of these executive orders.
All right, let me ask Michael Kirtley about this, because we don't really like conspiracy theories much on this show, and here I've seen a lot of articles this week that have focused squarely on Steve Bannon, the confusion that we saw at airports over the weekend, saying that this is part of a plan to seep chaos.
I think what we can say for sure is that it's kind of a shock and awe strategy. I mean, Donald Trump came out with a series of executive orders over the first week and many other statements that were made, lies to the press that were, almost everybody agreed that they were lies, whether it was about the size of his inaugural crowd or others. So right now you'd have to ask yourself, what is the strategy? In terms of seeing this as a conspiracy theory, I think that you have to wait a long time before you can see, dark forces at play, because the people are already in place. We know who Donald Trump is. We know who Steve Bannon is. We know what these people have represented in the past. So to suggest that there's something darker than they already represent would be a kind of a fool's errand at this particular point.
All right, the recoil is real. A Quinnipiac poll that was conducted at the beginning of the month, though, showed that 48% of American voters, as opposed to 42 against, supported suspending immigration from terror-prone regions, even if it means turning away refugees. An even greater number, 53 to 41, supported requiring immigrants from Muslim countries to register with the federal government. And again, the White House line is, this was a campaign promise. We're just fulfilling a campaign promise.
What's interesting, there's a couple of things that are very interesting here, namely the implementation. Like, why did they choose to do this last Friday before when they knew that today Sessions was going to have the vote up on his nomination? So they should
as Attorney General.
For Attorney General, yes, sorry. So it would seem like it would be much more easier to put this in place when he has his own Attorney General, because what happened is the acting Attorney General decided not to defend this action, which...
so you think that's part of a plan? This wasn't improvised?
It's kind of hard to understand what is going on. And to give further credence, I mean, I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories either, but Bannon has specifically said that this is part of a much bigger movement. And he said that this Trump administration is only the first inning. So I'm not quite sure what he's referring to. And the other the most unusual sign, which we're not even talking about, is the fact that Steve Bannon, has been given a permanent seat on the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, which is highly unusual. George Bush went to great lengths to make sure that Karl Rove was banned from this. Most presidents don't have political operatives in the National Security Council. There was an exception when Obama did invite Axelrod a few times.
Hang on, this conversation has gone a long way since the beginning of it, when Joe Smallhover was telling us about, the various branches of U.S. government. The wonder of the United States is that you have a strong executive, but also a strong legislative and a strong judiciary. Now we're talking about plots and, I've even seen reports accusing of coups. Are people reacting a little too heavily when it comes to what's going on?
I love conspiracy theories. I don't believe most of them, but I love them because they show a great deal of human ingenuity and creativity in putting them together. What I see, actually, is an administration that has no clue as to what it's really doing. So
there isn't a grand design.
There might be a grand design, but if it is, it's definitely a flawed one. They don't seem to have understood, for instance, the very executive order that we came here to talk about with respect to the Muslim travel ban was not vetted by the Justice Department, was not vetted by the Department of Homeland Security. It was done entirely within the White House with no legal study or even study of how it would have to be implemented. No one went to the Homeland Security and said, okay, now we're going to stop these people from coming in. What kind of chaos is this going to create at the airports? They didn't do that. It seems to me that what I'm seeing is rather a White House that doesn't know what they're doing, and but unfortunately they're trying to do very big things very quickly, which create total chaos. That then gives rise to massive protests, because remember that Donald Trump did not win the majority of the popular vote in this election. It was Hillary Clinton by almost 3 million votes. And that in all of the major metropolitan parts of the country, that's where you have majority Democratic votes. That's also in this case where the airports are. There's no major airport in southern West Virginia, so therefore, not surprising, you're not going to see protests there. But Washington, Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Atlanta, all had protests, and they're all major population centers that voted, in fact, not for Donald Trump.
All right, so that's where the hubs for globalization are and where people are recoiling the loudest. However, according to the Gallup polling agency, Donald Trump's popularity, it's 24 points lower than Barack Obama's early in his administration. However, Republican lawmakers keeping a low profile. An extensive Morning Consult survey published by the New York Times shows that the Republican base, and in particular those most interested in politics, overwhelmingly support the president. They're the ones most likely to vote in a primary. Michael Kirtley, are we perhaps only viewing this because those that Joe described, those that live near those big urban centers, who are shouting loudly against what's going on in the White House, are we overlooking that perhaps this isn't such a minority view, what's going on?
I don't feel it's a minority view at all. I think that, first of all, without entering into conspiracy theories, Donald Trump is doing more or less what he said he would be doing. I think that's very important to underline. People that voted for him believed him. Now, Donald Trump also said that he would govern for all Americans. One has to question whether he's actually doing that. But in terms of Congress, Congress is very nervous right now. Congress knows it has to be reelected, and there's always a question for the first midterm after a presidential election. And the people that are going to vote for Republicans in Congress are, generally speaking, hardline conservatives in many, many states. So they have to be careful not to offend those people, at least for the time being. I think that in America right now, I mean, I spent lots of time over the past 6 weeks among conservative Americans, because the Bridge to Hope campaign that you spoke about earlier is basically trying to figure out how to speak to conservative Americans. I foresee, without speaking of conspiracy theories, a huge breach in America right now between those who think they know what they're doing and those who know they know what they're doing, and nobody knows what they're doing right now in terms of dealing with Donald Trump. And the people that are on the more conservative side, the ones who voted for Trump, feel totally misunderstood and certainly misrepresented by the others. And the other side, the more liberal progressive side, are looking at that side of America and saying they don't count. Well, obviously they do count. And I think that today, if we're going to avoid a further split, we're going to have to figure out how to speak to each other.
Without calling each other snobs or hillbillies. When we come back, we're going to pick up on those points. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.